It's strange how quickly the Amazon rainforest can turn from a place of wonder to something that feels like it wants you gone. I'd gone down there for work, part of a research project mapping deforestation patterns. It was 2019 and I was 31. I wasn't some inexperienced tourist. I had worked in forests before, mostly in the US, and I thought I knew what to expect. But the Amazon isn't like anywhere else. It swallows you whole in ways you can't even explain. Our team had set up a small research station about 20 meters from the nearest village. Calling it a cabin was generous. It was more like a large wooden shack. It had 4 walls, a roof, and just enough space for a couple of cots, a desk, and our equipment. At first, it seemed perfect. The thick canopy above kept the worst of the heat off, and the hum of the jungle felt almost calming. I even enjoyed the rainstorms that rolled in every afternoon. But then one night, everything changed. It started with rain, of course. In the Amazon, rain isn't a gentle patter. It's like the sky opens up and dumps the ocean on your head. That night was worse than usual. By sunset, the rain was pounding so hard on the roof it felt like the wood might cave in. The sound was deafening, drowning out even the constant buzz of insects and the calls of distant animals. I was alone in the cabin that night. One of my colleagues had taken the boat downriver to get supplies, and the others were staying in the village for a few days. I didn't mind. I'd always liked solitude. But as the rain kept hammering down, I started to feel uneasy. The thing about being deep in the rainforest is how isolating it feels. No cell service, no roads, no one around for miles, just the endless trees and the knowledge that if something went wrong, you'd be on your own. I'd always thought I was okay with that. But that night, with the storm raging outside, the isolation started to feel more like a trap. Around midnight, I noticed something odd. The rain was still hammering down, but the usual jungle noises had stopped. No frogs, no crickets, nothing. Just silence. At first, I thought maybe the storm had scared them off. But then I remembered that wasn't how it worked. Rain didn't silence the jungle. It usually made it louder. I turned off the lamp and sat still, listening. That's when I heard it, a faint rustling outside. It wasn't the wind. It was deliberate, like something moving slowly through the underbrush. I told myself it was probably an animal, maybe a tapir or an armadillo, but it didn't feel right. The sound was too steady, too deliberate. Grabbing my flashlight, I walked to the window and shone it out into the trees. The beam of light barely penetrated the rain, but I could see the immediate area around the cabin. Nothing. Just wet leaves and muddy ground. I told myself I was being paranoid and went back to the cot, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there. I must have dozed off at some point because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by a loud thud. My heart was racing before I even opened my eyes. The sound had come from the back of the cabin. Sitting up, I grabbed the flashlight and aimed it toward the noise. The door was still shut, but something heavy had hit the wall. The thud came again, followed by another. It wasn't random. It was rhythmic, like something was testing the strength of the cabin. I felt a cold sweat break out on my back. I wasn't armed apart from a small utility knife. My radio was useless in the storm. Forcing myself to move, I crept toward the back wall, trying to stay silent. I pressed my ear to the wood and listened. For a moment, there was nothing but the rain. Then I heard it, a low, wet sound like something breathing heavily. It wasn't an animal I recognized. It wasn't an animal at all. The thudding stopped and everything went silent again. I stood there frozen for what felt like hours. Finally, I decided to check outside. I told myself it was just a precaution, but the truth was I needed to know if whatever was out there was gone. I stepped outside into the rain, holding the flashlight in one hand and the knife in the other. The rain was so heavy I could barely see a few feet ahead, but I swept the beam across the area around the cabin. At first, it seemed normal, just mud and water pooling around the base of the trees. But then I saw them, footprints. They were large, barefoot, and deep, like someone heavy had been walking in the mud. The tracks led from the back of the cabin into the trees. My stomach dropped. Whoever, or whatever, had made those tracks wasn't an animal. They were human, or close enough. I followed the tracks to the edge of the clearing, but they disappeared into the underbrush. The thought of going any further made my skin crawl. I backed away and returned to the cabin, locking the door behind me. For the rest of the night, I sat in the corner with the knife in my hand, listening to the rain and waiting for dawn. When the sun finally came up, the rain had stopped, and the jungle was alive again. Birds were calling, insects buzzing, everything back to normal. It almost felt like the night before had been a bad dream. But the footprints were still there, half filled with water but unmistakable. I spent the day checking the area, but I found nothing else. No more tracks. No signs of who or what had been there. When my colleague returned later that afternoon, I didn't tell him what had happened. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding crazy. I stayed in the Amazon for another month, but I never felt safe after that night. Every time it rained, I found myself tensing up, listening for that thud on the wall. Nothing ever happened again, but the memory stayed with me. I've thought about it a lot since then, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was just some local hunter passing through, curious about the cabin. Maybe it was something else entirely. I don't know. All I know is that the Amazon is a place that doesn't care about you. It doesn't want you there. And sometimes it lets you know. My partner and I are avid hikers. Last July, we went on a trip and decided to camp at a spot we love just west of Shenandoah. It's quiet, off the beaten path, and offers absolutely spectacular views of both Shenandoah and portions of George Washington National Forest to the west. The first day and evening of this trip were nice and uneventful, though we didn't sleep very well because of the humidity. The next morning, we decided to go for a hike in a portion of Jefferson Forest we'd never been to before. It's comprised of ATV trails and about a dozen campsites, but has a trail that leads to an old fire tower we'd always wanted to check out. It was about a 45-minute drive from our campsite, mostly on back roads. When we got there, the first thing that stood out to us was how empty the campsites were. We actually didn't camp there the night before because we'd heard that the site is usually packed, and we knew we wouldn't arrive early enough in the weekend to get a spot. There were only 2 spots taken. One had a desiccated tent and a bunch of garbage, looking like someone had been there for a while but had abandoned it. The other had a young woman, I'm guessing in her late teens, setting up a small backpacking tent. There was a truck and one other smaller car in the parking area. We parked and started getting our gear together. The woman approached us to ask if we knew where the trailhead was. I told her that we'd read it branched off about 100 yards into one of the ATV tracks, but we weren't 100% sure which one. Since I was getting such a weird vibe from this place, I kind of hoped she'd stick around and go with us to find it. But she just thanked us and took off in the general direction of the trail. We set off and walked down a few ATV trails until we found the actual walking path. We saw 2 ATVs shoot by us at one point, but otherwise didn't encounter anyone else, including the woman from earlier. It took us about an hour to get to the top of the mountain where the fire tower was. It's an old metal structure, and you have to climb a narrow set of stairs to get to the top. We got up, looked around, took some pictures, and then headed back down. Honestly, the view was kind of a letdown. About halfway down, very suddenly, everything stopped. The birds, the bugs, it was dead silent. I don't know quite how to put this into words, but it felt like the ancientness of the forest was contorting and crushing us. We felt trapped and cornered despite the expanse around us. My partner and I looked at one another and wordlessly started to book it out of there. We started running back to the car, but the feeling followed us. As we were rounding one of the switchbacks, we heard this unearthly shriek, like a cross between metal on metal and a choir screaming off-key. We saw something, just got a glimpse of it, right before we blacked out. I don't know how to describe it other than it looked huge, despite clearly not taking up much physical space. It moved in writhes and flashes, didn't have a color, and just felt like evil and emptiness. I probably only perceived it for about half a second before my memory gave way. When we came to, we were sitting in the car. 2 hours had passed, double the length of time it took us to get up there. I don't know if we lost consciousness or somehow blocked those hours out. I learned later the same thing had happened to my partner. Both of the cars were still next to us in the parking lot, and there were still just 2 tents at the campsite. The woman wasn't in hers, and it looked exactly the same as she left it. I think about her all the time. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out if someone went missing around the time of our trip. It took a few months for my partner and me to talk about that day. Some of the stories I've seen posted on this sub have made me feel so much less alone. We still love to hike, but honestly, haven't been able to go back into the Appalachian forest since this happened. I'm curious if others have had similar experiences. We all make dumb decisions in life, but in this case, I was stupid. Very stupid. I arranged to meet a guy off Tinder, but because of my heightened anxiety about driving, I stupidly agreed for him to pick me up outside my house. I'd been talking to him for a few weeks at least, but that's still not excusable. I know the choice I made that day could have ended me, but thankfully, I'm still around to tell this tale. The guy picked me up in his car and told me he planned to take us out for sushi. I love sushi, so I thought, great. He put the name of the restaurant into his GPS, and we were off, making pleasant conversation along the way. Then I started noticing woods outside my window. I felt very confused. We were supposed to be going into town, not deep into the wilderness and into the middle of nowhere. Fear hit me hard. Then he said, I swear the GPS is taking me through here. I didn't choose this path. Please just get us back to civilization, I said, my eyes wide. I must have looked like a deer in headlights. His face looked completely apprehensive, so he must have known I was scared completely out of my mind. I thought to myself, I should have just conquered my anxiety about driving and met him somewhere in public. Or better yet, not met this guy at all. What was I thinking? I'm gonna get murdered out here in these woods. I tried checking my phone to see if I could assist him with the GPS, and that's when he said those spine-chilling words to me. There's no signal out here. I remember thinking to myself, just look calm. Don't let him think you suspect he's up to something. But man, I was terrified. The tips of my fingers were cold, and I was simultaneously sweating. If he was going to kill me, part of me wanted him to just get it over with, so I wouldn't have to endure the anticipation. His forehead was sweating, and he kept saying, I swear I'm not doing this. I'm trying to get us back en route to the sushi place. I responded, I don't care about sushi anymore. Just get us to a gas station, anywhere with people at this point. Then he said, I don't have a shovel or a weapon in my trunk or anything, if that's what you're thinking, which obviously did little to calm my nerves. We finally reached the restaurant after what felt like an eternity. I had never been so scared in my life. I didn't have much of an appetite and was physically trembling when we arrived, but I figured he didn't kill me when he had the chance, so I guess it's safe now to continue the date. I had already planned to take an Uber home because I didn't want to go through that experience again. I was shocked out of my mind when he then asked, So, when do you think we'll have sex? I nearly choked on the piece of sashimi. What? I had no idea where this was coming from. I didn't know how he could even ask me something like that on a first date, especially after just seeing me pale as a ghost moments ago. You know, like, how long will you make me wait for it? A day? A week? A month? I stared at him, dumbfounded. I couldn't even find a response because I was utterly speechless in that moment. Well, I can't wait a whole month. I'm just telling you that right now. I didn't say anything and the rest of the date was insanely awkward. I said goodbye as I took my Uber home. Only seconds after my driver pulled out of the restaurant parking lot, my date texted me to say he didn't think it would work out because he needed a girl with a higher libido. I didn't even argue. Just texted back a simple okay, completely ready to be done with this man. When the Uber driver took me home, he didn't drive through the wilderness or that potential murder site. Instead, he took me home through streets with cars and lights. The sweetest scene, to my immense relief. I couldn't help but wonder why my date had taken me on an hour-long drive through the wilderness just to get to the restaurant when it only took the Uber driver 15 minutes to get me home from the same location. This entire experience was chilling. I don't know if my date had planned something sinister or if it was just an honest mistake. Either way, I'm glad I made it out alive. I definitely learned a tough lesson that night. One I should have already known, but foolishly ignored for some reason. Don't let strangers from a dating app pick you up in their car. And to the guy who took me through the woods, let's never meet again. It was the summer of 2017 when I decided to rent a cabin deep in the Appalachian woods. I had just turned 32, and life in the city had worn me down. The constant noise, endless deadlines, and suffocating crowds made me crave solitude. I wanted silence, a break from everything. So I found a cabin online that promised complete isolation, surrounded by nothing but trees and mountains. It seemed perfect. The cabin was in Tennessee, far from the nearest town. The website described it as rustic, which I took to mean no Wi-Fi and maybe a wood-burning stove. That was fine with me. I wasn't looking for luxury. I wanted peace. I packed lightly: clothes, some food, a flashlight, a book, and my hunting knife. I wasn't planning to hunt, but I figured it was a good idea to have it, just in case. I arrived in the late afternoon after driving for nearly 6 hours. The last stretch of the journey was along a narrow dirt road that twisted and turned through the forest. My small sedan struggled with the uneven terrain, and I couldn't help but think I should have rented an SUV. Still, I made it. The cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by towering trees. The roof was mossy, the wood was weathered, and the windows looked a little warped, but it had a certain charm. There was no driveway, just a patch of dirt where I parked. The air smelled of pine and earth, and the only sounds were birds chirping and the distant rustle of leaves. It was exactly what I had hoped for. Inside, the cabin was simple: a single room with a bed, a small table, and a fireplace. There was a tiny kitchenette with a sink and an old propane stove. The bathroom was an outhouse a few yards behind the cabin. No electricity, no running water. It was primitive, but it felt right. I unloaded my things, lit a couple of oil lamps, and settled in. That first night, I sat by the fireplace, reading by the flickering light. The silence was almost overwhelming, but I welcomed it. I fell asleep easily, wrapped in a heavy wool blanket. I didn't even notice the creaking sounds that came from the woods as the wind moved through the trees. The next morning, I decided to explore the area. I had no phone signal, so I couldn't rely on GPS, but I had brought a map. The trails weren't well marked, but I figured I'd stick close to the cabin. I walked for hours, taking in the scenery. The forest was dense, with sunlight barely breaking through the canopy. I saw deer tracks, heard the distant call of a hawk, and even spotted a fox darting through the underbrush. By the time I returned, the sun was dipping low. I realized I had wandered farther than I intended, and made a mental note to be more careful. As I approached the cabin, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was a strange tension in the air. I brushed it off, chalking it up to my tired mind, and went inside. That night, I woke up suddenly. It was pitch black, and for a moment I couldn't figure out what had startled me. Then I heard it, a faint rustling sound, like leaves being disturbed. It was coming from outside, near the edge of the clearing. My first thought was animals, maybe raccoons or a deer. But the sound didn't move like an animal. It was too slow, too deliberate. I grabbed my flashlight and my knife, telling myself it was nothing. I opened the cabin door and shined the light toward the trees. The beam didn't reach far, but I saw nothing unusual. Still, the rustling continued, now seeming to circle the clearing. My heart pounded, and I closed the door, bolting it shut. The noise stopped after a while, and I eventually fell back asleep. In the morning, I found something that made my stomach twist. There were footprints in the dirt outside the cabin. Human footprints. They weren't mine. I hadn't been outside barefoot. The prints circled the cabin, stopping occasionally as if whoever made them had been standing and watching. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone else was camping nearby and had gotten lost. Maybe they were curious about the cabin. But deep down, I knew that didn't make sense. The cabin was miles from anything. I shook it off and decided to go about my day. I spent most of it chopping wood for the fireplace, trying to keep myself busy. That night, the noises came back. This time, it was more than rustling. I heard twigs snapping and what sounded like quiet footsteps. I stayed inside, clutching my knife and flashlight, too afraid to open the door. The sounds continued for hours, stopping and starting, always just beyond the edge of the clearing. In the morning, I found more footprints. They were closer to the cabin now, and there were more of them. I felt a knot of fear in my stomach. I decided to leave. I packed my things and loaded them into the car, but when I tried to start it, the engine wouldn't turn over. I checked under the hood and found nothing wrong. The car was old, but it had never given me trouble before. It didn't make sense. With no way to leave, I was stuck. I spent the day trying to figure out what to do. There was no phone signal, and the nearest town was too far to walk before dark. I decided to wait until morning and hike to the main road, hoping to flag down a passing car. That night, the noises were worse. They started earlier, just as the sun was setting. I heard heavy breathing outside the cabin, and at one point, something scratched at the door. I stayed up all night, sitting by the fireplace with my knife in hand. When dawn finally came, I felt a mix of relief and dread. I grabbed my backpack and started walking toward the main road. The forest felt different, darker, quieter. Every snap of a twig made me jump. After an hour, I realized I was lost. The trail I thought I was following had disappeared, and the trees all looked the same. I stopped to get my bearings, and that's when I saw it. A figure standing in the distance between the trees. They were too far away to make out any details, but I could tell they were watching me. I froze, my heart racing. Then they moved, disappearing into the shadows. I turned and ran, not caring which direction I went, as long as it was away from them. I ran until my legs burned and my lungs felt like they would burst. Eventually, I stumbled back into the clearing where the cabin sat. I had somehow gone in a circle. Desperate and out of options, I locked myself inside the cabin. I stayed there for 2 more days, surviving on the food I had left. The noises never stopped. Sometimes I heard footsteps, other times whispers. I never saw who or what it was, but I knew they were out there, waiting. On the 3rd day, I woke up to silence. No rustling, no footsteps, just the wind in the trees. I cautiously stepped outside, clutching my knife. My car was gone. The patch of dirt where it had been parked was empty, with no tire tracks leading away, just empty space. I didn't wait to find out what would happen next. I grabbed my backpack and started walking, not caring about the direction. Eventually, I stumbled onto the main road and flagged down a passing truck. The driver took one look at me and didn't ask any questions. I never went back to the cabin, and I never found out who or what had been out there. All I know is that something was watching me, and it wanted me gone. It was early spring 2017. I had just turned 25 years old. My friend and I had reached our main camping spot, Black Canyon Rim Campgrounds, just outside of Payson, Arizona. We usually traveled out here 2 or 3 times a year. It had some incredible views and was only a couple of hours away from the city. For the most part, this area was pretty secluded. A privately owned convenience store was a few miles away, with a small town about 20 miles before that. The entrance to the campground was on a dirt road directly off the highway, marked with a sign displaying information about local wildlife, fire hazards, and general camping news. The path was mostly linear, with one fork spanning several miles. We once followed the dirt road to see how far it would take us. One path led to another highway entrance with a ranger's tower halfway there. The other led to a dead end with an abandoned cabin hidden a few miles in, concealed by large foliage. The snow had mostly cleared up by this time of year, leaving behind crisp air and a slight chill. The fauna was becoming active again. We'd usually spot wild horses, deer, and plenty of smaller critters whenever we came out this way. It was the perfect time of year for a relaxing trip to get away from the city for a few days. We arrived around 4 p.m. on a Tuesday, late for us, as we usually tried to get there by noon at the latest. This trip was pretty spontaneous. We both had work over the coming weekend and decided to just go for it. The sun was setting fast, and we still hadn't picked a campsite. There were maybe 2 other groups, both families, parked somewhat close to the entrance, only a few hundred yards from the highway. This time around, we wanted to get away from people for a while. Customer service jobs will do that to you. We drove further down the dirt road, past our usual spot, and finally picked the perfect area, a a small clearing on the edge of a hill with a stunning view of the valley below and the sunset. We decided this would be our main spot from then on, if the next night's incident hadn't happened, that is. We agreed to get a campfire going and decided not to set up a tent. We didn't have much time, and her car wasn't that uncomfortable. I'd sleep in the back seat, and she'd take the passenger seat. With the windows slightly ajar, a few blankets each, and the serene sounds of nature, we thought we'd drift into a restful slumber. The next day went by uneventfully as we decompressed. However, I had a strange feeling throughout the day, as if we were being watched. Every few hours, I'd hear the crunching of leaves just out of sight. I brushed it off as local wildlife, though my friend didn't notice anything unusual. When night came, the feeling still lingered. My friend must have sensed it too, though she didn't vocalize it. She ended up taking some sleeping pills, something she rarely needed on these trips, as the ambience of nature was usually enough to lull her to sleep. Around 1 a.m., my friend had dozed off in the passenger seat, while I was in the back seat, scrolling through my phone. The window opposite me was rolled down slightly, letting in the cold breeze. Suddenly, I heard something outside, leaves crunching nearby. I whispered to my friend, "Hey, do you hear that?" But she was already asleep. I put my phone down and listened intently for a couple of minutes. Nothing. Probably just a small animal. I returned to my phone, but 10 minutes later, I heard it again, this time closer, right outside the car door. I lowered my phone, my eyes adjusting from its glow to the darkness. As I turned the phone away, its backlight illuminated the window near my feet. What I saw still haunts me. 2 dirty, scabbed hands gripping the window frame, the long, dark nails curling inside the car. Behind the window was the silhouette of a face pressed against the glass. Every few seconds, its breath created condensation. All I could make out were the reflections of its black, empty eyes. I froze. I couldn't move or scream. It felt like an eternity as I locked eyes with this thing. Thoughts raced through my head. Why hasn't it run away? What is it planning? Is this the face of death? After about 10 seconds, the hand slowly unclenched, retreating into the darkness. The condensation on the window began to fade. A moment later, I heard the crunching of leaves again, this time growing fainter as it moved away. I finally snapped out of my paralysis, pounding on my friend's seat to wake her. She stirred, confused. I kicked open the back door and scanned the area, but whatever it was had vanished. I frantically gathered our camping supplies, shoving everything into the car while constantly glancing over my shoulder. When I slammed the back door shut, I saw them, a grim reminder of what had just happened. 2 handprints on the window. In a panic, I wiped them away as if erasing the event itself. I jumped into the driver's seat, started the car, and floored it out of there. My friend, now fully awake, asked what was going on. I could barely explain as I sped down the dirt road. Eventually, we reached the highway, and 20 miles later, we stopped at a Denny's. There, I recounted everything that had happened. Months later, the nightmare subsided, but the embarrassment lingered. People say you either have a fight or flight instinct. I'm still unsure which I have, because I did neither. To this day, I often wonder, who or what was out there? A prankster? A resident of that abandoned cabin? Something paranormal? We've gone camping there since, but never stray far from the highway. Whatever it was, I hope it's the last I'll see of it. This happened back in 2004 in northern Wisconsin. I was 16 at the time, out deer hunting with my dad and one of his friends, Frank. I remember this day like it was yesterday, though the dialogue itself isn't word for word. The idea of it is 100% accurate. My dad and I had a few different stands over an area of maybe 3/4 of a square mile. He'd been hunting there for at least 10 years, and I'd been going with him since I was around 5. Up until I was about 12, I was just tagging along. On this particular morning, we walked to my stand first. It was about 5 a.m. and it was still dark outside. I got situated, and my dad and Frank went off to the other 2 stands over a ridge, maybe 500 to 600 yards away. Sitting there in the dark is always a little eerie. Not long after my dad and Frank left, I saw a flashlight in the general direction of where they had headed, maybe 200 yards away, roughly moving in my direction. I figured they had forgotten something from the truck, so I radioed to see what they were doing. My dad said they weren't backtracking, so obviously this flashlight belonged to someone else. This isn't super common, but it's not a huge deal either. Those woods get crowded sometimes, and there's a parking spot in that general direction. I turned on my light so the other hunter could see that someone was already there. The person stopped, and then I saw the light turn and head in a different direction. No big deal. I ended up dozing off while it was still dark out. When I woke up, the sun was up, and it was around 8 a.m. I sat there for a bit and radioed my dad to see if he'd seen or heard anything moving. Nothing yet. A couple of gunshots went off in the distance. I got up to take a slow walk to get my blood moving a bit. Not far, maybe 30 yards out and back, trying not to make any noise. When I returned to my stand, I sat down and took a good look around. Nothing was really going on. Then, I looked out to my left where I'd seen that flashlight earlier, and I spotted something orange. For those unfamiliar, hunters have to wear blaze orange during gun season. I radioed my dad and Frank to see if either of them was moving around. Dad again said no, and I got no response from Frank. I grabbed the binoculars out of my backpack to see if it might be Frank, but it definitely wasn't. This guy was looking at me through his scope, his rifle aimed directly at me. This is obviously a huge no-no, a massive rule we all learn in hunter's education. Never point your rifle at something you don't intend to shoot. Still, dumb people do it. It's rare but not unheard of, and it's why responsible hunters use binoculars. My first thought was, what is this guy doing? Even with me looking at him, he didn't lower his gun. Now I was starting to panic, thinking I might become the next hunting murder victim. I slowly grabbed my rifle, got up, and stayed behind as many trees as I could while walking down a little path to the side of my stand. My stand was on a small knoll on the side of a much larger hill. I radioed my dad and told him what was going on. He told me to sit tight and stay out of sight. Obviously, as a 16-year-old, I couldn't do that and kept looking. Every time I looked, that guy was still aiming in my direction, but always standing in a different spot. I'd look, hide, then look again, and he'd be 30 yards from where he was the last time. About 10 minutes of this went by. My dad radioed me. Looking back, he was trying to keep me calm. At the time, though, I thought he wasn't taking me seriously. I told him, he's still there, but he keeps moving. I don't know what his problem is. Dad told me to stay hidden, and that he'd be near the guy in a minute or two. That's when I heard the shot. I lost my mind trying to get a hold of my dad. Did he just get shot? Where is he? Did he have to shoot that guy? What's going on? I sat there for what felt like hours, though it was only 2 or 3 minutes. Finally, I heard my dad on the radio. All right, come on out and head toward my stand. I peeked over the knoll and saw my dad waving from along the ridge where the random guy had been. I made my way over to him to see what had happened. It turned out Frank had been feeling a little restless, took a stroll and ended up on the other side of the ridge where the stranger was, not even knowing he was there. Frank had knocked his radio battery loose while getting situated earlier that morning and had no idea anything was going on. The shot I'd heard was Frank shooting a deer. Dad said as soon as Frank shot, the guy walked off, heading toward the logging road. We helped Frank with his deer and decided to call it an early day. Although I was extremely nervous, the rest of the week passed without incident. So, to the dumbass stranger in the woods with absolutely no common sense, let's never ever meet again. I remember the camping trip with my grandmother like it happened yesterday. I always called her Gran. She loved the outdoors, always saying it kept her feeling young. I wasn't as excited as she was, but I thought it would be nice to spend some time with her. We drove out to a far-off spot in the woods, far from any towns or people. Gran liked it that way, quiet and peaceful. The first day was pretty normal. We set up our tent, cooked dinner over a fire, and watched the sun go down behind the trees. Gran talked about the different plants and animals around us. Her voice was calm and steady, and it made me feel safe, like nothing could go wrong as long as she was there. That night I fell asleep quickly, the sounds of the forest making me feel relaxed. But sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. The fire had burned down to just a few glowing bits of wood, and the night was completely dark. I could hear Gran breathing steadily from her side of the tent, so I knew she was still asleep. I tried to figure out what had woken me up. The night was still almost too quiet. I listened closely, but all I could hear was my own heartbeat, which was starting to race. I told myself it was nothing, just the unfamiliar place making me nervous. Nervous, I tried to go back to sleep, but then I heard it. Something moving outside the tent. It was faint, like a soft shuffling through the leaves. At first, I thought it might be a deer or some other harmless animal, but then the sound got louder, closer, like whatever it was moving around our campsite. I lay there frozen, not sure what to do. My eyes were wide open, staring into the dark, trying to see something that wasn't there. The noise stopped, and I felt a small bit of relief, thinking it had moved on. But then I heard it again, right outside the tent, just inches from where I was lying. The sound was different now, not like an animal, more like someone dragging their feet through the dirt. My mind raced with all kinds of thoughts, none of them good. I didn't want to wake Gran, thinking it might just be my imagination. But as the minutes passed, the sound didn't stop, it only got worse. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I sat up slowly, trying to be as quiet as possible. I reached for the flashlight by my side, my hands shaking. I didn't want to turn it on, scared of what I might see, but I had to know what was out there. Just as I was about to turn on the light, the dragging sound stopped again, followed by an eerie silence. I held my breath, listening, waiting for something to happen. The silence dragged on, and I started to think that maybe whatever it was had left. Maybe it was all in my head, just me being paranoid about being in the woods at night. I slowly relaxed my grip on the flashlight, easing up. That's when I felt something brush against the side of the tent, right where I was sitting. It was subtle, but it was definitely there, like a hand or a branch lightly touching the tent fabric. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would explode out of my chest. I forced myself to take a deep breath, trying to calm down. I needed to stay clear-headed to think this through. I decided to wait it out to see if whatever was out there would leave. But the minutes felt like hours, and the silence was only broken by the occasional rustling, too close for comfort. Then, just as quickly as it started, it stopped. No more dragging, no more rustling, just the sound of my own breathing and Gran's soft snores. I sat there for what felt like forever, waiting for the noise to come back, but it never did. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with me, and I must have fallen asleep. When I woke up, it was morning. Sunlight was shining through the trees, and everything looked so normal, so peaceful. It was hard to believe that the night before had even happened. Gran was already up, making breakfast over the fire. I didn't mention what I had heard, and she didn't say anything either. Maybe it was better that way. We packed up camp after breakfast, and I felt a strange relief as we drove away, leaving that place behind. But as we left the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been out there with us that night. Something that didn't belong. I kept glancing back, half expecting to see someone or something watching us from the trees. Even now, I can't explain what happened, but one thing is for sure. Something was out there, and it was watching us. I can't stop thinking about what could have happened if I had turned on that flashlight, if I had actually seen what was outside the tent. Part of me is glad I didn't, but another part of me feels like it's still out there, waiting. I won't be going back to those woods. Never. But sometimes, late at night when the world is quiet and dark, I can almost hear it again, the dragging sound just outside getting closer. This incident happened in 2019. I would love to know if anyone else has had a similar encounter, because I've never been able to shake the feeling that this individual is a serial predator of some kind. I've never been able to stop thinking about what happened. My then boyfriend and I were on a road trip during the winter of 2018. It took a day to visit Petrified Forest National Park in Arizona. For anyone who hasn't been there, you drive down a long road that winds through landscapes and exit at various stops along the way to view different points. We were there at maybe our second or third stop when we encountered the creep. This particular stop has a wide parking lot and a handful of large educational signs at either end, and a path that leads up to a historic site and various vantage points. As we made our way up the path to the main site, a man was coming down towards the parking lot. He looked pretty much exactly like Mr. Clean, but in a red t-shirt and jeans. He was tall, upwards of 6'2". As we passed each other, he muttered something odd under his breath, though it was clearly intended to get our attention. My boyfriend turned around and asked him what he said. The man looked at us almost stunned for a moment before he seemed to decide to come up with something else to say. He pointed into the distance and asked, no joke, "What's that over there?" All there was over there was some kind of utility box on the road through the park and desert. We brushed him off and said we didn't know, then continued up the path. When he called out, "See you later, pretty girl," there's hardly a woman alive who hasn't had something like this said to her 10,000 times before. But this felt unusually sinister and set my nerves on edge. We both decided to just ignore him though, and headed up to the rest of the site. After 15 to 20 minutes of looking around, I finally had to admit to my boyfriend that I felt like we were being watched. He nodded and said that guy hasn't left and has been watching us this entire time. From where we were standing on a hill, we could see the parking lot. I noticed our creep standing near an educational sign at the far edge of the parking lot, clearly positioned to see up the hill at us. We were both bugged by it, but we resolved not to let it ruin our time or to get too bent out of shape about it. We took our time at the stop, shook off the nerves, and by the time we went back to the parking lot, he was gone. We drove another mile or two to the next vantage point, which included a number of petroglyphs on a cliff wall that you can see using binoculars. You have to take a narrow road into the parking lot, which creates a bit of a bottleneck. As we were about to enter, a blue RAV4 pulled in front of us and blocked us from coming in. It was, in fact, that same creep. After a few moments of intense eye contact with my boyfriend, who would later say, without a trace of exaggeration, he felt like he wanted to kill him, the guy slowly pulled away and let us enter the lot. He left, so we told ourselves we were overthinking it, but I decided to spend a good long time where we were to let him get well ahead of us, so we wouldn't keep running into each other. Our next stop, a mile loop hike, was about 3.5 miles away. We figured we'd spent enough time at the petroglyphs that even if the guy was at our next destination, he'd either be close to done with the hike or leaving by then. Unfortunately, he waited for us about 2 miles up the road. We spotted that same blue RAV4 pulled over to the side of the road. The man was standing next to the car, sort of looking vaguely into the distance. The landscape is beautiful in the park, but even though there was nothing especially spectacular about this spot, maybe he was just taking it all in away from the crowds. As we drove by, I looked behind us, and he turned to watch us, staring at our car driving away until we rounded a corner and could no longer see him. When we got to the parking lot and got out to take the hike, we were both feeling a little rattled. My boyfriend, who normally tolerates creepiness in others to a fault, was so shaken by the vibes this guy gave off that he actually stashed a little window-breaking hammer from his car safety kit inside his hoodie pocket, just in case we felt we needed it for self-defense. I guess that sounds nuts now, but it's just one of those things we all do to feel a little safer when we get creeped out. The hike itself is down at the bottom of this kind of valley. You walk down a steep, winding path to the bottom, where the path splits and forms a circuit around this area that includes all these cool little hillocks of painted rock dotted with petrified wood. We made it all the way down to the beginning of the loop. We noticed the guy up at the top of the cliff off the parking lot, looking down our way. We were about halfway around the loop when we saw the guy at the base of the hill about to start. We were relieved because we knew we'd be out of there before him this time and felt like we could finally shake him and stop feeling weirded out. For most of the loop, you can see the whole path and the whole hill up to the parking lot. But for the middle section of the walk, you're shielded from view behind these little hillocks and different topography. When we emerged near the end of the loop, we were still feeling good, but took a quick look to place our creep before heading back. We didn't see him anywhere. Maybe he decided not to do the walk, or maybe he was behind one of those little hills. As we made our way back up the steep path, we noticed him at the top, just waiting by this informational sign. Switchback after switchback, he stayed put, apparently intently reading the sign. As we got closer, we noticed he was now holding something. When we got to the top of the path, where we knew we'd have to pass within inches of him again, we tightened up, locked arms, and prepared to march right past as quickly as we could. Even though lots of people were walking by him coming and going, he waited for us to cross his path. Turns out that what he now had in his hands was a windshield washing squeegee and a spray bottle. There was something in it. As we tried to walk past him, he turned to us and said, "Hey, can you help me? I'm running out of time," and started to hold up the spray bottle and squeegee. My boyfriend was in no mood and said, "Nope, leave us alone," in a pretty nice but harsh tone. As we kept walking, the guy, smiling, replied, "Well, you too. Nice ass, though. Both of you," and started determinedly following us. He was gaining on us by the time we got to the car, and I barely made it in and locked the door before he was right next to my window, staring at me. Even though I was freaked the hell out and my instinct was just to keep my head down, I didn't want to give him the upper hand and let him make me cower. So I looked up and stared right into his eyes. Just thinking about it makes my stomach turn. He was right up next to my window, staring and unblinking, with his hand up in a frozen wave, smiling. When I looked into his eyes, the first thought I had was that he wanted to skin me alive. It sounds completely insane to say, but I think anyone who's had an encounter with someone like this will completely relate. When someone means you harm, there's something that kicks in, and you feel it deep, in a strange way. My boyfriend had the presence of mind to start snapping pictures of the guy, who then moved around our car to try to keep us from driving away. My boyfriend started revving the engine to try to get him to move. It didn't work. He just kept blocking us. So we started inching the car forward. Still, he didn't move. We tapped him and he stumbled back a little, but just kept standing there. Then we noticed there was a family a couple of cars over staring at us over their lunch. The creep noticed too, smiled that nasty smile, and then just gave us enough room to get out of our parking spot. As we sped away, as we passed the family, the man in the front seat gave us an encouraging nod. It was sort of like, "We saw it, we're watching him, we've got your back." I immediately called the park office and told them what was going on. They sent a ranger out to check on the guy. We headed to Winslow, Arizona, stopped at a bar to have a drink, and tried to chill out. We were so freaked out that we actually checked the car for a tracking device, which also, I know, sounds crazy. But it was one of those situations where the vibe the guy was giving off turned the emotion of the events way past what seems normal. Later that night, we got a call from the ranger who told us they ended up having to arrest the guy for disorderly conduct and asked us to provide a statement of our experience. We tried to find more about him or what happened after we left, but haven't been successful. I'm so curious if this guy sounds familiar to anyone, especially the weird window washing ploy. In all our adrenaline, we had all kinds of wacky theories. Maybe there was some poison in the bottle, or the squeegee had a knife hidden in it or something. I'm sure we were exaggerating, but I've never been able to stop feeling like we dodged a bullet with that guy. This version corrects some spelling and grammar errors, making the story flow more smoothly. The air was cool when I got to the campsite, a remote spot deep in the woods. It had been years since I was last here with my ex-wife, and now it was just me. I set up the tent, started a fire, and tried to push away the awkward memories of her. Night fell quickly, and the forest grew dark. The fire crackled softly, casting the only light in the growing darkness. I was starting to relax when I heard a faint, rhythmic tapping. It was hard to tell where it was coming from. It could have been the wind or a stray branch. I ignored it and focused on the warmth of the fire. As the night went on, the tapping grew louder and more persistent. It sounded like someone was knocking or tapping out a pattern. I checked outside the tent, but saw nothing. I went back inside, but the sound was still there, now joined by a strange scraping noise. I tried to ignore it, but sleep was impossible. The noises kept getting louder and more aggressive. The tent seemed to be shaking a little, though there was no wind. I finally unzipped the flap to check outside. The night was still and silent, and the fire was dying down. I walked around the edge of the campsite, looking for anything that might explain the noises. As I neared the edge of the clearing, I spotted something odd. A shallow hole partly covered with leaves and dirt. I could see a corner of a wooden box sticking out. My heart raced as I dug up the box. It was old, and the wood was damp. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were personal items, photos, letters, and a diary. The stuff looked like it had been buried for a long time. There was also a map with a marked point, pointing to a spot nearby. A cold shiver ran down my spine when I saw that the diary had entries about the campsite and the area around it. The last entry was from around the time of our last visit. It talked about someone watching from the woods and the need to leave before it was too late. Fear gripped me. I quickly packed up, deciding it was best to get out of there before anything else happened. As I drove away from the campsite, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The woods were dark and silent, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. Something that had been waiting for me to dig up the box. I never went back to that campsite, and I never told anyone about what I found. The sense of dread stayed with me, a constant reminder that some places hold dark secrets. To this day, I wonder if the things watching from the woods are still there, waiting for the next person to uncover what should have stayed buried. I decided to go camping at a spot my neighbor had mentioned. It wasn't a place many people knew about, which made it seem like the perfect escape. A quiet weekend away from the city noise sounded just right. I left early in the morning, driving through narrow, twisting roads that were lined with thick trees. As I got closer, the trees seemed to grow taller and denser, making the road darker. The road turned into a bumpy dirt path, and soon I reached the campsite, a small, open area surrounded by woods. The only sound was a distant stream, barely breaking the silence. I set up my tent and started a small fire. The day passed quietly, with nothing but the sounds of birds and rustling leaves around me. As the sun set, the temperature dropped and the woods grew even darker. The light from the fire only lit up a small area around me, leaving everything else in deep shadow. That's when I noticed something strange. The woods, which had been full of noises from animals and rustling leaves, suddenly went quiet. It wasn't a normal kind of quiet. Everything just stopped all at once. I felt a cold chill go through me, but I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks. I tried to sleep, but I kept waking up to small sounds, like something moving outside the tent. The noises were quiet, like something light stepping on leaves. I kept telling myself it was just animals, maybe a deer or a raccoon, but with every noise, the uneasy feeling grew stronger. In the early morning hours, I heard something I couldn't ignore. It was the sound of footsteps, slow, careful, and definitely human, moving around my campsite. They were trying to be quiet as if they didn't want to be heard. My heart started racing as I lay there, holding my breath, listening to the slow steps. I realized I wasn't alone anymore. The footsteps circled my tent, stopping every few seconds. I stayed as still as possible, barely breathing, hoping that whoever it was would just leave. But they didn't. Instead, they stopped right next to my tent, so close that I could hear them breathing. I waited, not knowing what to do. Every second felt like it stretched on forever. Then, without warning, the footsteps started moving away, slowly at first, then faster, until they faded into the distance. I didn't sleep at all for the rest of the night, too scared to move or make a sound. As soon as the first light of dawn appeared, I packed up my things as fast as I could. I didn't even stop to eat. I just wanted to get out of there. I left the campsite and made my way back to the car, feeling like something was watching me the entire time. The woods, which had seemed so peaceful the day before, now felt like they were hiding something dangerous. When I finally reached my car, I felt a rush of relief. I threw my gear in the back, got in, and started the engine. I didn't look back as I drove away, the feeling of being watched slowly fading as I put more distance between myself and that place. But later, when I got home, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching me. It wasn't just in the woods. Whatever it was, it followed me back. I checked the locks on my doors, double-checking each one, but the uneasy feeling never left. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard a soft creak outside my window, like someone stepping on a loose board. I froze, barely breathing as the sound moved closer. The same slow, careful footsteps I'd heard in the woods. It wasn't the woods that weren't as empty as they seemed. Sometimes what follows you home doesn't just stay outside. It's already inside, waiting for the right moment to let you know you were never alone. And this time, there's nowhere to run. I had always wanted to go camping in the French countryside. There was something about the untouched woods, the quiet little towns, and the vast open fields that felt so peaceful. After working non-stop for months, I decided to take a week off and finally do it. I picked a spot deep in the woods, not far from a small village where there weren't many people around. It seemed like the perfect place to relax. The first 2 days were calm. The trees stood tall and still, with just the sound of leaves moving every now and then. At night, it was cool but not freezing, and the stars above stretched across the sky. I had everything I needed, set up my tent and made simple meals over the fire. There wasn't anyone around for miles, and I liked that. It felt like I had the whole forest to myself. But on the third night, things started to feel different. As the sun went down, I realized the usual calm was gone. The woods were too quiet. No birds, no wind, nothing. It felt like the forest was waiting for something. I tried to ignore it, but it left me feeling uneasy, like something wasn't right. I made dinner like I usually did and got into my tent once the fire went out. I wanted to sleep, but that feeling of something being wrong wouldn't go away. I lay in the dark, listening to the silence, hoping it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep from being so tired. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly. The tent was completely dark, and at first I didn't know why I was awake. Then I heard it. A sound I couldn't ignore. Footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps coming from just outside my tent. My heart was pounding, and I stayed as still as I could, barely breathing. I didn't want to believe what I was hearing, but it was real. The footsteps got closer, circling around my tent. I tried to tell myself it was an animal, but the way the steps sounded, they were too slow, too heavy, too much like a person. I grabbed my flashlight, trying not to make any noise, and turned it on. The light flashed through the tent, and for a second, the steps stopped and everything went quiet again. But my mind was racing. What if someone was out there? What were they doing? I listened, hoping it would go away, but after a few moments, the steps started again, this time moving away, back into the forest. I stayed awake the rest of the night, my heart racing every time I thought I heard something, but the footsteps didn't come back. When the sun finally started to rise, I cautiously stepped out of my tent. There were no signs that anyone had been there, no tracks, no broken branches, nothing out of place. But that feeling that someone had been watching me stuck around. I packed up my things as quickly as I could, deciding I'd had enough of the French woods. On the drive back to the village, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Someone or something had been out there, walking around my camp. I kept trying to make sense of it, but the more I thought about it, the more unsettled I felt. It didn't seem like something I could just brush off. A few days later, when I was back home, I did some digging online to see if I could find out more about the area. That's when I came across some old stories about people disappearing in that forest, hikers and campers who went into the woods and never came back. No one ever found their bodies, and the local police had stopped looking after a while. That was all I needed to know. I'll never go back to that place. Not even close. It felt like the forest was hiding something dark that I was lucky to escape from. I still wonder what was out there that night, circling my tent, but part of me thinks it was just a warning. Next time, I might not be so lucky. This is a story that my mother and aunt told me when I was in high school. I'm 21 now, and it has never left me. I think about it constantly and ponder over what happened. My grandfather passed away in June of 2020, close to a year ago. He was 96 when he died, and his death caused some issues in the family. These issues don't directly pertain to the story, but there are certain things about him that I need to share to explain the story in the best possible way. My grandfather, John, was a man who was extremely calloused and old-fashioned. He was bitter, abusive, and a complete macho man. My mother was raised to never show emotion or pain due to his abuse and lack of compassion. He was also an extreme racist. After his death, many family secrets began to surface. Everything that happened around him was brushed off and forgotten because he always had more important things to do, like drinking and having affairs. He was an intense, no-nonsense type of man. He was not religious at all and considered things like faith and hope to be stupid. The story takes place sometime in the 1970s, most likely the early to mid-70s. My mom was born in 1965 and remembers this story very clearly. My aunts remember it as well, but can't pinpoint the exact year. One summer day, John decided to take his family on a small outing for a picnic in the woods. My mother, her 3 sisters, and my grandmother were all there and excited about it. Where we're from, my family is accustomed to the woods, having lived in the area for generations. Going into the woods for a family activity was nothing out of the ordinary and seemed like just another normal day. They drove down a dirt backwoods road and stopped when they found a clearing large enough to accommodate them. The kids eagerly jumped out of the car and began playing after being cooped up during the drive. Meanwhile, my grandmother started unloading their food and picnic supplies. John surveyed the area to decide where to set up. As he was doing so, something in the woods beyond the clearing caught his eye. Before heading off to check it out, he yelled to the family, saying he'd be right back. Neither my grandmother nor the kids thought much of this since they were all familiar with the woods, and these particular woods were no exception. They continued unloading and setting up their things. Suddenly, one of the girls noticed something unusual in the clearing. It was a dirt mound, roughly the size of a small person, possibly even child-sized. It was too large to be an animal, especially since the woods in that area only had small animals like squirrels and raccoons. Scattered on the mound were large river rocks, which had been placed there intentionally, though not in any particular pattern. The dirt looked fresh, darker, and looser than the surrounding ground, as though it had just been dug up. The atmosphere shifted immediately from a fun day to something much darker. My grandmother became concerned and told the girls to stay away from it. Although she tried to stay calm and focus on the picnic, she was clearly unsettled. The children, being young, didn't share her level of worry and continued playing, avoiding the mound but carrying on as usual. The day seemed to return to normal briefly, with the girls chasing each other and laughing again. However, the sense of unease lingered. The trees around them created a dense wall of foliage, blocking their view of the deeper woods. Then, another of the girls spotted something else, this time hanging from a tree branch. It was a noose, tied high above their heads. While a dirt mound could potentially be explained away by nature, someone had to have placed that noose there. My grandmother froze when she saw it. Something was very wrong. They couldn't just leave because John was still in the woods. Even the children, who were too young to fully understand its implications, recognized the noose as a symbol of death. Anxiety began to spread through the group. Trying to maintain calm, my grandmother told the children it must have been left by deer hunters. However, deep down, she knew no sane hunter would hang a deer and then bury it. Her unease grew even stronger when they began hearing something from the woods, a rhythmic chanting. The sound was faint at first, echoing from deep within the trees. It was a deep, droning chant, accompanied by a drum beat, 3 steady beats, followed by a pause, then repeating. The sound grew louder and closer with each passing second. Panic set in as the sound engulfed the clearing, vibrating in their chests like they were at a concert. The chanting seemed to come from all directions, as if the very trees were alive with the noise. Suddenly, John's voice broke through the chanting. He was yelling from the woods, telling them to get in the car. He came running out, his face full of terror. The most emotion anyone had ever seen from him. John, the man who was afraid of nothing, was visibly shaken to his core. My grandmother quickly began throwing their things into the car as the kids scrambled inside. John and my grandmother loaded the car as fast as they could, not caring about organization. Food spilled everywhere, and some items broke, But they didn't stop until everything was inside. Once they were all in the car, they sped away. The main part of the story ends here, but one detail has haunted me ever since. My grandfather never spoke about what he saw in the woods that day. He refused to tell anyone, neither my grandmother nor his children. Anytime the story was brought up, he angrily shut it down and told them never to ask again. He never reported it to the police or spoke of it outside the family. Whatever John saw that day stayed with him until his death. When I first heard the story, I swore to myself that I would ask him about it one day. But now I can't, and I regret it deeply. By the time I was in high school, he had moved out of state to live with other family members, and I lost contact with him apart from the occasional birthday calls or letters. We weren't close, especially as I grew older and learned more about the abuse he caused. I distanced myself from him, but his death still looms over me because of this story. For my mother and aunts, this is just a spooky childhood memory, something to tell around the Thanksgiving table. But for me, it's a mystery that won't let go. I've always been fascinated by the occult, horror, and conspiracy theories, and this story captured my curiosity like no other. This isn't the only strange story from my family, but it's certainly the most unsettling. I wish I had answers, and I hope you find this story as fascinating as I do. In the summer of 1988, my grandmother thought it'd be a good idea for us to go camping. She said I needed to spend more time outdoors instead of sitting inside playing video games. I didn't really mind. She had an old beat-up tent, a rusty lantern, and a cooler packed with sandwiches. This kind of trip was right up her alley, simple and no extras. We drove out to a state park about 2 hours from her house and set up our tent near a lake, in a spot where only a few other people were camping. They were scattered far enough away that it felt like we were alone. The first day was normal. We walked around, checked out some trails, ate sandwiches by the water, and I helped her build a small fire. As the sun went down, the woods around us got dark fast. The trees swallowed up the last bits of light, and soon it was just the fire and the stars. I wasn't used to it being that dark, but my grandmother didn't seem to care. She was a tough woman, never afraid of anything. That night, though, I couldn't sleep. The forest was alive with strange sounds, branches cracking, leaves rustling, and what I swore sounded like footsteps far off in the distance. I kept telling myself it was just animals, but something about it didn't feel right. I lay there for hours, staring up at the inside of the tent, listening to every little noise. My grandmother slept peacefully next to me, breathing slow and steady in her sleeping bag, totally unaware. The next morning I tried to brush it off. I told myself I was just letting my imagination get to me. We spent the day fishing and cooking over the fire, but when the sun went down, the noises came back, and this time, they were closer. I lay in my sleeping bag, my heart racing as I listened to the sounds outside the tent. I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was out there, watching us from the darkness. By the third night, I was on edge. Every little sound made me jump. I tried to act like it was all in my head, but the feeling wouldn't go away. After we got into our sleeping bags, I lay there trying to calm myself down. Then I heard it again, a soft, slow crunching of leaves right outside the tent. My whole body tensed up. I stopped breathing, straining my ears to listen. The footsteps were slow, almost careful, like whoever it was didn't want to be noticed. They circled around the tent, close enough that I could feel the ground move under me. I didn't dare move. I wanted to wake my grandmother, but I was too scared to even whisper. The footsteps stopped right next to my side of the tent, and for a long moment everything went quiet. Then something pressed against the side of the tent, right where my head was. I felt it drag down slowly, like a hand brushing along the fabric. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might give me away. I lay there frozen, waiting for whatever it was to make its next move. After what felt like forever, the sound of footsteps came back, this time moving away from the tent. I didn't move for a long time, just staring into the darkness, too afraid to close my eyes. I must have eventually passed out from exhaustion, but it wasn't restful. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. My grandmother was already outside, stirring the fire like nothing had happened. I got dressed quickly and stepped out of the tent, my mind racing, going over everything from the night before. I walked around the tent, looking for any sign of what had been out there. At first, everything seemed normal, just leaves and dirt. But then I saw them. Deep footprints in the ground, much too big to be from any animal. They led from the woods straight to our tent and stopped exactly where I'd felt the pressure on the fabric. But it wasn't the footprints that made my stomach turn. It was the fact that they didn't lead back into the woods. There were no tracks leaving our campsite, just the ones that came in. Something or someone had walked up to our tent and never left. I didn't say anything to my grandmother. We packed up camp and left that morning. I couldn't stop thinking about those footprints on the drive home. No matter how hard I tried to forget, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that something had been there with us, watching us. And to this day, every time I think about that night, I wonder where they went, or worse, if they're still out there following me, waiting for the right time to come back. We were camped out in the middle of nowhere for a training exercise deep in the mountains. It was supposed to be an easy army trip, nothing big. We set up our tents close to the woods where the trees were thick, and the air felt cold. You could smell the pine trees all around us. It was so quiet out there that you could almost forget how far we were from anything. The first night went all right. We did the usual stuff, set up our tents, ate some quick meals, and kept watch around the camp. But by the second night, something didn't feel right. It wasn't the usual feeling of being out in the wild. It was different, like something was off, but I couldn't figure out what. I was on guard duty, walking and looking around the camp, when I started hearing noises. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but it didn't sound like that. It was more like someone or something moving around in the woods, just outside of where the trees started. I looked into the darkness, but I couldn't see anything. The moonlight barely got through the branches, making it tough to see far into the forest. I told myself it was probably just animals. Still, that creepy feeling stuck with me the rest of the night. When my shift ended, I went back to my tent, but I couldn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, it felt like someone was watching me. By the third night, everyone else seemed tense too. No one was saying anything, but I could tell by the way they moved and kept looking at the woods that something was bothering them. The air felt heavier that night, like something was in the woods keeping an eye on us. That night, I heard the noise again. This time, it was closer. I grabbed my gear and stepped out of my tent. Some of the others were already awake, standing by the campfire, looking into the trees. I knew they had heard it too. We all stood still, listening. The sound came again, moving closer. It wasn't an animal. Whatever was out there was bigger, and it was moving slowly like it didn't want us to hear it. My heart was racing as I stared into the trees, trying to see what it was, but I couldn't make out anything. Then behind me I heard something in the bushes. I turned quickly, ready for anything, but there was nothing there. Just the dark woods. Everything had gone quiet again. Too quiet. We didn't sleep that night. We all stayed up, watching and waiting, but nothing else happened. No more sounds, no movement, just silence. By morning, we were worn out, but we had orders to stay another night. We couldn't leave yet. As the sun went down again, I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight was going to be worse, and it was. Just after midnight, the noises started again, but this time, they were coming from all around us. Whatever was out there was circling our camp, staying just out of sight. My stomach turned, and I knew this wasn't normal. There was no way it was just animals. Then, there was a loud crash, like something big had hit the ground hard, not far from where we were. I felt my blood run cold. We rushed toward the sound, our flashlights cutting through the dark, but there was nothing. No tracks, no signs of anything. Whatever it was gone. We didn't wait for the morning. We packed up and got out of there before the sun came up, ending the training early. The higher-ups didn't say anything about what happened, just told us to move out. I didn't ask any questions, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they knew something we didn't. Whatever was out there in those woods, it was watching us the whole time, waiting. And I don't think it was just the wind that kept me awake those nights. There was something out there, something real. Something we couldn't see. And I think we left just before it was ready to show itself. Growing up on a farm with over 250 acres of land had its perks: endless space to explore, the freedom to roam, and a sense of solitude that's hard to find anywhere else. At 17 years old, I was no stranger to hard work. My dad ran the place with a firm but fair hand, and I was more than willing to help out wherever I could. One summer evening, Dad mentioned needing some trees cleared in the deepest part of our woods. He offered to pay me well for the job, more than he usually would. The extra cash sounded good at that age. At the time, I had my eye on a used dirt bike that a friend of mine was selling, so I jumped at the opportunity. The next morning, I loaded up the truck with all the necessary gear, packing everything into the sturdy trailer my dad let me borrow. The area he wanted me to clear was a good drive through rough terrain, parts of the property we didn't frequent often. As I set off, the sun hadn't quite set yet, but was well on its way, making our fields look golden. The drive took about half an hour, the path getting narrower and more overgrown as I went deeper. When I made it to the spot, I took a moment to appreciate the serenity. There were tall trees all around, and the wind sounded peaceful. I got to work, the chainsaw roaring to life. The first few trees came down without a hitch. As I moved on to the next, I had the odd sensation of being watched. I paused, cutting the engine and listening closely. There was nothing unusual, just the typical forest sounds. So, for the time being, I shrugged it off and continued my work. A couple of hours later, while taking a break, I noticed something strange. One of the trees I'd felled earlier was missing. That couldn't be right or possible. Trees don't get up and walk away. I headed over to where it should have been, scratching my head. There was the stump, cleanly cut, but the tree itself was gone. I looked around, thinking maybe I dragged it off and forgotten about it, but no, it was nowhere in sight. A bit unsettled, I decided to chalk it up to me being forgetful and moved on. As the day wore on, little things started to nag at me. Shadows seemed to shift just beyond my line of sight. Once, I thought I heard faint laughter, but I assumed it was the wind. I should have been alone out here. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, but every time I looked around, I was still alone. Well, after dark, I sat down for a late dinner. While eating, I felt that prickling sensation again, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I scanned the perimeter, but again I saw nothing out of the ordinary. Then, a sudden rustling sound caught my attention. About 20 yards away, the bushes shook violently as if something big was moving through them. I stood up in an instant, ready to go. "Hello?" I called out, getting no response. Wildlife was common out here: deer, foxes, sometimes a bear, but this felt different. Deciding it was best to keep working and finish up, I got back to it. By the time I loaded up the last of the logs onto the trailer, it was deep into the night. The woods were quiet, the daytime creatures settling down as the nocturnal ones began to stir. I checked my watch. 1 a.m. time had really gotten away from me. I pulled out my cell phone and called home. Mom answered on the second ring. "Hey, Mom. Just letting you know I'm going to camp out here for the night. It's a nice evening, and I'd rather not drive back in the dark." "All right, Han. Be safe, and call us the moment you need anything." "Will do. Good night." After hanging up, I set about making a simple camp. I always kept a small tent and sleeping bag in the truck for occasions just like this. With the tent pitched near the truck, I started a small fire to cook some dinner. Just canned beans and hot dogs. But they really hit the spot. Sitting by the fire, I pulled out a book my dad had lent me, a non-fiction book about the Civil War. My dad was a bit of a history and folklore buff. After a while, I closed the book, tossing another log on the fire. The night was calm, the fire crackling softly. But the quiet was soon interrupted by a faint sound, like someone stepping on dry leaves. I looked up, peering into the dark beyond the fire's glow. Just some animal, I thought to myself. Still, the feeling of being watched returned, a bit stronger than before. I decided to turn in, thinking after all that hard work, it'd be easy to sleep. I doused the fire, leaving just a few embers glowing, then crawled into my tent. Lying there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the strange occurrences throughout the day were just adding up and getting to me. Sometime later, I drifted off, only to be jolted awake by a loud thump. I sat bolt upright. The sound had come from near my truck. Listening closely, I heard what sounded like heavy breathing, but it was irregular. I unzipped the tent just enough to peer out. The moonlight made everything look extra creepy with how it cast the shadows, but I didn't see anything unusual, at least not at first. The truck and trailer were sitting there just as they should, but then I saw something. A shadow slipping behind a tree, too big to be any animal I knew. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Then I saw the shadow move again, darting from one tree to the next, always just out of full view. It was like it knew exactly where my gaze would land and avoided it perfectly. There was something familiar about it, but I wasn't sure why. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was nothing, just my eyes playing tricks. Gathering my courage, I grabbed the flashlight and shone it toward the trees. Everything was silent until I began to hear the breathing again, closer this time. I swung the flashlight around frantically. For a split second, I thought I saw a figure, a tall, gaunt shape slipping behind a tree. My hand shook, the light wobbling. I knew, deep down, that I shouldn't stay out here. Slowly, I backed into the tent and packed up what little I had inside. Emerging cautiously, I made my way toward the truck, keys in hand. The trailer was loaded down with logs. I climbed into the driver's seat and locked the doors. The engine roared to life, and I felt a wave of relief. I put the truck in gear and tried to pull forward, but the vehicle struggled. The weight of the loaded trailer was too much for the uneven terrain. Panic set in. With the trailer attached, maneuvering quickly would be nearly impossible. If I could get moving at all, I needed to unhook it. Gathering every ounce of courage I had, I stepped back outside into the dark. I was terrified. I could feel eyes on me, and my hair stood on end. I worked quickly, unlatching the trailer, causing metal to clank loudly in the forest. Then I heard it, a low growl behind me. Too scared to glance in that direction, I finished unhooking the trailer and jumped back into the truck. Flooring it, the tires spun for a moment before gaining traction, and I sped down the rough path, branches scraping the sides. In the rearview mirror, I thought I saw movement, a dark shape standing in the middle of the path, but it vanished as I rounded a bend. The drive back was a blur. I didn't slow down until I saw the lights of the farmhouse in the distance. Pulling into the yard, I shut off the engine and sat there, hands gripping the wheel tightly. I didn't tell my parents the full story, just that I decided to come back early. They noticed the trailer was missing, and I explained I'd left it there, planning to retrieve it the next day. That night, sleep eluded me. I kept thinking about what I'd seen. The next morning, Dad and I drove back to get the trailer. The area looked normal enough in the daylight. The trailer was still there, loaded with logs. "Why'd you unhook it out here?" Dad asked. "Had some trouble maneuvering last night," I replied. "We hitched it back up without incident." As we were about to leave, I glanced back toward the trees. For a brief moment, I swear I saw a dark shape slip behind a trunk, but it could have been a trick of the light. Back home, I went straight to the bookshelf in my dad's study. Something about the experience felt familiar, though I couldn't put my finger on why. I searched through the volumes until I found one I remembered reading years ago, a book on North American forest folklore. I read through the evening until I came to one creature, the hide-behind. According to legend, the hide-behind preyed on those alone in the woods after dark. It could contort its body to hide behind the narrowest of trees, always staying just out of sight. Victims often reported feelings of dread and the sensation of being watched before disappearing without a trace. A shiver ran through me. I wasn't one to believe in folklore. I'd always thought it was just fun to read, but the parallels were too strong to ignore. I decided to share a bit with my dad in a subtle way. "Have you ever heard any stories about strange things in the woods?" I asked him. He looked at me. "Your great-grandpa used to tell tales about creatures out there, some old lumberjack legends." "Like the hide-behind?" He raised an eyebrow. "You've been reading that book, huh?" "Yeah, just curious." "Those are just stories, son. But honestly, I've always thought every legend had a kernel of truth. Always good to be cautious out there, especially if you're alone." I nodded, not entirely reassured. From that point on, I believed something was out there. I avoided going deep into the woods alone and stuck to familiar areas near the farm. One evening, I met up with a friend who lived nearby and mentioned my experience. To my surprise, he didn't laugh me off. "Well, you're not the first to feel that way out there," he said. "I've heard old-timers around here talk about strange happenings, stories of missing livestock and eerie sounds. Some of them won't even go into the woods after dark anymore." This was both comforting and unsettling. To know I wasn't alone in this was a small relief, but it also made everything feel more real. To this day, I tread carefully on our land. The woods aren't as serene as they used to be. They're a place to be respected and feared. What do you think? Do you believe the hide-behind is real? Have you ever encountered one? Let me know, because I'm very, very curious. Thank you for tuning in to Unexplained Encounters. I had gone camping a few times before, but never like this. This spot was way deeper in the woods than I had ever been. I wanted some time alone, away from the noise and people, and this seemed like the perfect place. I parked my car at the edge of a small open area, grabbed my stuff and set up camp. By the time it was late afternoon, everything was set. The tent was up, I had gathered enough firewood, and I started a small fire to keep the chill away. As the sun started to go down, I noticed how quiet it was. No birds, no wind, no sounds from the bushes. Just nothing. I had hoped for some peace, but this silence felt weird, almost too heavy. I tried to ignore the strange feeling and focused on making my dinner. The fire crackled as I ate, but the strange feeling stuck with me. I kept glancing into the woods, expecting to see something moving, but there was nothing, or at least not yet. It got dark faster than I thought it would. I put out the fire and crawled into my tent. Usually when I camp, the sounds of the forest help me fall asleep, but tonight it felt off. It was way too quiet. I closed my eyes, trying to force myself to sleep, but every small sound outside made my heart race. A twig snapping, leaves rustling. Normal sounds in the woods, but tonight they felt different, like they were too close. Hours passed, and I was finally starting to doze off when I woke up suddenly. My heart was pounding, and I wasn't sure why. It wasn't a noise that woke me, it was the lack of it. There was no wind, no animal sounds, nothing. I lay there listening, trying to hear anything outside the tent, and that's when I felt it. Something was out there. I don't know how I knew, but I could feel it. My skin went cold, and I broke into a sweat. I stayed completely still, trying not to breathe too loud. I kept telling myself I was just being paranoid, that it was all in my head, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Then I heard it, a soft crunch of leaves, like footsteps. Slow and steady, moving around my tent. Someone or something was walking out there. My heart raced as I listened, trying to figure out where it was coming from. The steps circled the tent once, then again, then they stopped. The silence after that was worse than the sound of the footsteps. I didn't dare move. I lay there frozen in fear, every second dragging on like it would never end. After what felt like forever, the footsteps started again, but this time they moved away deeper into the woods. I stayed still for a long time, too scared to do anything. Eventually, I worked up the courage to unzip the tent just a little and peek outside. There was nothing there. No one. I didn't sleep at all after that. I kept waiting to hear those footsteps again, or to see something moving outside the tent, but nothing happened. When the sun finally came up, I didn't waste any time. I packed up my stuff as fast as I could and threw everything into my car. As I was driving away, something caught my eye at the edge of the clearing where the woods began. Footprints. Not animal tracks, but human ones. They led into the trees and disappeared. The thought hit me hard. Whoever had been out there had been watching me. They knew I was there. They had circled my tent, listening to me, waiting for something. I pressed down on the gas, wanting to get out of there as quickly as possible. The whole drive home, my heart wouldn't stop pounding. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there all night watching me. I checked my rearview mirror more times than I'd like to admit. Even though I was miles away, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there, maybe even following me. As I drove, I couldn't help but wonder if I had been watched the whole time I was out there, even before I heard those footsteps. I had been traveling around Italy for a while, and after a few weeks of seeing the sights, I needed a break from the crowded cities. I found a quiet campsite near the mountains, far from any main roads or towns. The area was calm. Tall trees surrounded a small open space, and a thin stream ran along the edge of the site. It seemed like the perfect spot to unwind for a couple of nights. I set up my tent, started a small fire, and sat back to enjoy the peacefulness. The first day went by smoothly. I spent the afternoon walking around, listening to the sounds of the forest and the occasional bird off in the distance. As the sun went down, everything grew quiet, almost too quiet, but I brushed it off, telling myself I was just overthinking it. That night I woke up to a strange noise outside the tent. At first I thought it was an animal. Wild boar or deer were common in this part of the country, so I wasn't too worried. But the sound was odd, like something heavy being dragged across the dirt, slow and steady. I listened for a while, my heart racing a little, but eventually the noise stopped and I fell back asleep. The next morning I walked around the area looking for any signs of what might have made the noise. I couldn't find anything out of the ordinary, so I figured maybe I had dreamed it. I spent the day hiking a bit further up into the mountains, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. Something about the quietness of the woods, how empty and still it felt, made me uncomfortable. That night, I went into my tent earlier, hoping a good night's sleep would help me forget about it. But in the middle of the night, I woke up again to the same sound. This time it was even closer, right outside the tent. A slow dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the ground. I stayed still, listening, barely breathing. The sound slowly moved around the tent, circling it. I could feel the ground slightly shaking beneath me with each pass. It felt like it went on forever. Finally, the sound faded away into the woods. I stayed awake until the sun came up, listening, but the forest had gone dead silent again. The next morning, I decided I'd had enough and wanted to leave early. As I was taking down my tent, I noticed something strange in the dirt around where my tent had been. There were deep, smooth grooves, like something heavy had been dragged around the campsite. The marks were wide and didn't look natural. There were no footprints or signs of any animals, just the strange, dragging lines that led into the woods. Curious, I followed the trail. It led deeper into the forest, weaving between the trees. I walked for a while until I came to a small clearing. At first, there didn't seem to be anything there, just an empty patch of dirt. But then I saw it. A large, heavy stone, smooth and round, sitting in the middle of the clearing. The ground around it was disturbed, like the stone had been dragged through the dirt, just like the marks back at my campsite. It didn't make any sense. There was no reason for it to be there, no sign of people, no explanation for how such a huge stone could have moved. It looked like someone, or something, had been dragging it through the forest. I backed away, my heart pounding, and hurried back to the campsite. As I packed up my gear, my hands were shaking. I just wanted to get out of there. As I was finishing up, I heard it again. The dragging noise, faint but growing louder, coming from the direction of the clearing. It was heading my way. I didn't look back. I grabbed my stuff and took off, walking as fast as I could without running. I didn't stop until I was far away from that place. I don't know what I saw, and I don't know what was out there with me. But the way that stone had been moved, the way that sound followed me, I can't shake the feeling that whatever was out there wasn't human. Something was watching me, something that didn't want me to see it. And I still wonder what might have happened if I hadn't left when I did. I decided to take my stepbrother Mark on a camping trip. We were both excited about it. The plan was to head to a remote spot deep in the woods, far from other people. I thought it would be a good chance for us to bond and escape our busy lives. We got to the site in the early afternoon. It was a quiet, out-of-the-way place by a small lake, surrounded by thick trees. The place was perfect, isolated, peaceful, and far from any other campers. We set up our tent, built a fire, and spent the evening cooking over it. The night was cool, but nothing too unusual. Around midnight, after Mark had fallen asleep, I was lying in the tent, looking at the faint light of the lantern. The sounds of the forest were soothing, except for one thing: a steady, distant thud. It sounded like someone was hitting something, or a muffled drumbeat. At first, I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just an echo or some animal, but as the hours went by, the sound got louder and more urgent. It was coming from the direction of the trees, not far from our campsite. I tried to wake Mark, but he was deep in sleep, and shaking him only made him mumble. Feeling more curious and uneasy, I decided to check it out. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The night was dark, and the thudding seemed to grow louder as I walked toward the forest. My flashlight cut through the darkness, casting creepy shadows on the trees. The thud was now mixed with a strange scraping noise. I moved carefully, shining my flashlight around. The noise seemed to come from near an old, half-buried tree stump. As I got closer, I saw a broken wooden crate, partly hidden under leaves and dirt. It was the source of the scraping sound. I was about to look closer when I noticed something strange about the crate. It was covered in what looked like dried mud and old blood. My heart raced, and I felt a shiver down my spine as I realized this crate hadn't just been left here. It had been purposely hidden. I pulled at the crate and it came loose with a groan. Inside there was a small, rusty metal box. I hesitated but finally opened it. Inside, I found old photographs and personal items, most of them with people's faces scratched out or covered up. A chilling feeling washed over me. It was clear this box didn't belong here, and the stuff inside was deeply unsettling. I quickly closed the box and buried it again as best as I could, my mind racing with thoughts. I returned to the tent, trying to stay calm and not wake Mark. The next morning I packed up our stuff, eager to leave the place. I didn't tell Mark about the crate. I thought it was better not to scare him. We left the campsite without any trouble, and the drive back was quiet. As I looked back at the forest from the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had uncovered something deeply disturbing. It wasn't just the crate or the strange noise. It was the unsettling thought that whatever was hidden in that box was meant to stay buried. The forest seemed to watch us as we drove away, like it was holding its breath, waiting for us to leave. I couldn't escape the sense that we had been watched, and that we had left something behind, something that didn't want to be found. The unease lingered long after we were gone, and I knew that whatever we had stumbled upon was still out there, waiting in the shadows. I was in the army, and we were on a training exercise deep in the woods. We had set up camp for the night, far from any town or road. The trees were thick around us, and the only sounds were the leaves rustling and the occasional distant call of an animal. The air was cold, and a mist was starting to creep in, making the night feel even more isolated. We'd been moving all day, carrying heavy packs and gear, and by the time we set up our tents, I was exhausted. We ate quickly, using our headlamps to see what we were doing, then crawled into our sleeping bags. The forest was dark, with only the faint glow of our campfire and the dim lights of our headlamps to break through the blackness. Lying in my tent, I stared up at the fabric above me, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling creeping in. Something about this place felt wrong, but I thought it was just because I was tired, so I tried to sleep. I woke up to a strange noise. It was a low, steady thumping, like something heavy hitting the ground over and over. I listened closely, trying to figure out what it was. The sound was steady, almost like footsteps, but too heavy to be a person. I sat up and unzipped the tent quietly, peeking out into the darkness. The mist had thickened, making it hard to see much beyond the faint glow of our dying fire. I couldn't see anyone else moving, so I figured the others were still asleep, but the thumping continued, getting louder and closer. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the tent. My boots sank slightly into the damp ground. I moved the light around the camp but saw nothing unusual. The sound was coming from deeper in the woods, just beyond the trees that surrounded our campsite. My gut told me to stay put, but something else, maybe curiosity or a sense of duty, pushed me forward. I walked slowly toward the noise, each step feeling heavier as the sound grew louder. The mist swirled around me, and the trees seemed to close in, their branches almost reaching out like hands in the darkness. I kept going, my breath visible in the cold air. As I got closer, I noticed something strange. The ground was disturbed, like something had been dragged through the dirt and leaves. My heart pounded in my chest, and I fought the urge to turn back, but I kept going, stepping over the disturbed earth until I reached a small open area. In the middle of the clearing was a huge tree, its trunk twisted and gnarled, roots sticking out in all directions. The sound was coming from behind it. I moved around the tree, my flashlight aimed ahead, trying to stay calm. When I got around the tree, I froze. There was a massive pit in the ground about 10 feet wide and just as deep. The edges were rough, freshly dug with chunks of earth scattered around. At the bottom of the pit, something big and dark was moving slowly. That was the source of the thumping. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It looked like an animal, but it was too big, its movements too deliberate. As I watched, it pulled something out of the ground, a long, thick root, or maybe a branch, and slammed it against the side of the pit over and over, creating that horrible, steady sound. The truth of what I was seeing hit me hard. This wasn't an animal. It was a person, or what used to be a person. Their body was covered in mud, muscles straining as they dug desperately into the ground. The hole was filled with other things, too, old bones, bits of cloth, and what looked like pieces of metal or wood. It was a grave, or maybe several graves, all mashed together in one horrific pit. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. This person had been digging for a long time, alone out here in the woods, their mind gone from the isolation, or maybe something worse. And now they were creating this place, this pit of death. I turned and ran back to camp as fast as I could, my breath coming in short gasps. When I reached the tents, I collapsed to my knees, trying to calm myself down. My mind was spinning, trying to process what I'd just seen. We left the campsite at first light, no one saying a word about the night. I never told anyone about the pit or the person digging it, but the memory of that sound, the steady thump of earth being moved, has stayed with me, haunting my thoughts. Now, whenever I'm alone in the woods, I listen carefully, dreading the day I hear it again, because I know that if I do, it won't just be a sound in the distance. It will be close. Too close. And I won't be able to turn away. The pit will be waiting. And this time, I'll be the one pulled into the darkness. This happened when I was growing up, around 2004 or 2005. I was about 13 years old. It took place in a rural area quite a ways outside of Uvalde, Texas. The town itself was really small back then, not much to look at, just one of those towns that really isn't on the way to anywhere important. My father knew someone who owned a deer lease that was about 1,000 acres down in that area. Anne, the owner, had been complaining a ton about hogs tearing up their land. Since it was open season on hogs in the south, my dad thought he would surprise me that summer and take me down for a week to go hunting. It not only helped him with networking for his job, but it also gave us some quality father-son time. I remember the drive down from Dallas. It was torture. It was about 7 hours in my dad's hardtop Jeep Wrangler. The car was so uncomfortable, I hated it. All I could do was either stare out the window or try to play Super Mario Land 2 on my Game Boy Pocket, something I was never able to accomplish in my youth. The drive obviously took most of the day, and we got there in the early evening. The owner of the land had told my dad that he hadn't had anyone lease it that year, and the cabin on the property might be a little rough and dusty. I didn't really care at that point in my life. I'd been in the Scouts for a couple of years and spent a lot of my free time in the woods fishing or with friends. Needless to say, I was pretty comfortable roughing it. So, after unlocking the gate and driving down to the cabin on the land, we settled in. The cabin was pretty rough. Dust covered everything, flies buzzed around, and it looked like some raccoons had gotten into the place. After cleaning up a bit and getting out the sleeping bags, then setting up the cots, we decided to sleep. Something about that night was weird. I was never able to get comfortable enough to fall asleep for any restful amount. I couldn't quite put my finger on why, but I had the feeling of being watched. I finally drifted off, what I guess was maybe an hour. When we woke up it was early, around 7 a.m. We decided to scout around the land for tracks and signs of hogs and find a good place to set up a blind. It was summer, and it was horribly hot in the afternoon, so morning was the best time to be out. After walking for an hour or so, we came upon some lightly dense trees, and luckily found signs of the hogs, typically torn up ground where they had been rooting. So we followed them into the trees. I was looking for more signs when my dad stopped me with his arm. I remember looking up and seeing someone standing about 50 yards away. Some of their body was blocked by the trees. This was private land, so they definitely weren't supposed to be there. We had also confirmed from the owner before we got to the lease that nobody was out there. Not to mention the gate was locked when we first arrived. The person was wearing a brightly colored red jacket. We slowly walked toward them, and my dad called out something like, "Hey, we're hunters. This is private land." The person didn't move at all, dead still. We were about 30 yards away and could see that they were turned away from us with their hands in their pockets. The weird thing was that this person was wearing a ski jacket and what looked to be ski pants. Now this is Texas in the summer. It was about 98 degrees outside by then. My dad called out again. Still no reaction. He told me to stay behind him and unsnap the clip on his pistol holster. We approached the person's right side, and my dad told me to stay put about 20 yards away. I stayed, crouched down, and watched him circle around to the front of the man, all while talking to him and asking if he was okay. He finally passed around, and my dad stood up straight with a confused look on his face. I called out, "What's wrong?" He called back, saying, "It's a mannequin." I walked over to it while my dad just stood there staring at it. As I got closer, one thing stood out the most. The clothes it was wearing were brand new. No dust, no sap, no bird droppings, or signs of being outside for more than a day at most. That moment, I looked at my dad, and I could see him get worried almost immediately. After that, I felt that same feeling again, like we were being watched. And I know my dad felt it too. I wanted to start crying, and I remember feeling suddenly so scared. My dad whispered, "We're leaving right now." He grabbed my hand and drew his pistol. He scanned the area the entire way back while I was trying to hold back panic tears. We got back as fast as we could. I was so terrified, but it felt like an eternity. In reality, it was only maybe 45 minutes max. After returning, we packed up and left that day. We didn't talk much on the way back. I remember right after we left, my dad called his buddy, the owner of the land, and he was confused. He said that he would go check it out the next week when he was in the area. He also said that he had never had any issues with people because his property was high fenced. My dad isn't normally a paranoid person, but with me being young and the possibility of someone out there that we didn't know about, he decided to be cautious and just get out of there. After we got back home, we talked. My dad wasn't able to sleep the night before either. He had that same feeling I did, but didn't want to wake me up because he thought I was sleeping. Turns out the next week he got a call from his buddy. He checked the whole property and never found any trace of anyone. No mannequin or anything. That story still makes my hair stand on end. No idea what that was, but the paranoid part of me thinks it was some kind of trap or something. Not the creepiest thing that happened to me in the woods, but definitely in the top 3. I'm a Canadian cop, and last summer I decided to spend a weekend camping alone in the wild. I picked a secluded spot deep in the woods, far from any trails, hoping for some real peace and quiet. The place was beautiful, tall pines, a calm lake, and just the sounds of the forest. I set up my tent and started a fire to cook dinner. As the sun went down, the forest grew dark, and the usual quiet was sometimes broken by the sound of leaves rustling. I felt pretty relaxed, knowing I was ready for anything and used to being out here alone. Around midnight, I was woken up by a soft, steady tapping on my tent. At first, I thought it was just branches moving in the wind, or maybe a small animal, but then the tapping got louder and more rhythmic. It was coming from different sides of the tent, and it felt too organized to be random. My instincts kicked in, and I grabbed my flashlight and gun, even though I was off duty. I slowly unzipped the tent and shone my flashlight around. There was nothing there. The forest was unnervingly quiet. I stepped outside and checked the area. Everything seemed fine, but I noticed something odd. The ground around my tent was disturbed, like someone had walked around it carefully, staying out of the light from the fire. My heart was pounding, but I tried to stay cool. I decided to check it out, keeping my flashlight and gun ready as I walked around. I found small footprints in the dirt, bare footprints. They were fresh, and the fact that there were no shoes meant someone had been trying hard to stay hidden. I followed the tracks, keeping my distance and moving quietly. They led me to the edge of the lake, and what I saw there made my blood run cold. Across the lake, I saw a figure standing among the trees, barely visible in the dim light. The figure didn't move, almost like it was watching me. A chill went down my spine. I knew I had to get out of there. I hurried back to my camp, packed up quickly, and got into my vehicle. As I drove away, I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see someone behind me. The figure was gone, but the uneasy feeling stayed with me. Back home, I reported the strange events to the local police, but no one was ever found in that area. The footprints and the odd disturbances around my tent were never explained. It was a harsh reminder that even in the most isolated places, you're never truly alone. The unsettling reality is that someone or something was out there, watching and waiting. My mom and I planned a camping trip by this quiet lake we'd been to before. It wasn't far, only an hour's drive from home, deep in the woods. We liked it because it was calm and no one else went there, so we felt safe, even though it was far from everything. The first day went smoothly. We set up the tent, got a fire going, and spent the day sitting by the water. The air was fresh, and it was quiet, no one around for miles. It felt nice, like we had the whole place to ourselves. When night came, we climbed into our sleeping bags. I could hear the soft sounds of the forest outside, leaves rustling, a few crickets. It helped me fall asleep fast. But sometime during the night, I woke up. The fire had gone out, and it was completely dark inside the tent. The only light came from the moon outside, but even that was faint. As I lay there, I heard a noise outside the tent. At first, I thought it was just the wind in the trees, but then I realized it was something else, something closer. It sounded like something moving through the bushes near us. I stayed still, listening hard, trying to figure out what it was. My heart was beating fast, but I didn't want to move. Then I heard it again, a dragging sound, low and slow, like something was being pulled across the ground. I froze, trying to convince myself it was just a deer or some animal, but the noise kept coming closer, slowly making its way around the tent. I looked at my mom, who was still asleep next to me. I didn't want to wake her up and make her scared if it was nothing, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Suddenly, the tent moved. It wasn't a big movement, just a slight push, but enough to make my stomach twist. Whatever was out there had brushed against the side of the tent. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound. I didn't move, just listened, waiting for it to happen again. But nothing happened for a while. Then, after what felt like forever, I heard soft footsteps, faint at first, then quieter as they moved back into the woods. I lay there, eyes wide open, not daring to close them again. I stayed like that until morning, listening to every little noise, waiting for it to come back, but it never did. By the time the sun came up, I had almost convinced myself I imagined it. Maybe it was just the wind after all, or maybe I was dreaming and woke up in the middle of it. My mom didn't say anything about hearing noises, so I didn't bring it up. We spent the day fishing and hiking, but I couldn't shake this feeling that something wasn't right. Every time I looked at the trees, I felt like there were eyes on us, like someone or something was watching. But I kept quiet. I didn't want to scare my mom or ruin the trip. The second night, I barely slept. Every sound seemed louder, every shadow seemed bigger. I lay there with my eyes open most of the night, just waiting, but nothing happened. It was almost too quiet, and that made me even more nervous. When the morning came, I felt a wave of relief. We packed up quickly, eager to get out of there. As we loaded up the car, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Right outside where our tent had been, there were deep, long drag marks in the dirt. They led from the trees right up to our tent, and then back into the woods. I didn't say anything to my mom, but I couldn't stop staring at those marks. They were way too big to be from any animal. I knew it looked like something heavy had been dragged around our tent in the middle of the night, right when I heard those sounds. We left, and as we drove off, I kept looking back at the woods, expecting to see someone or something standing at the edge, watching us go, but there was nothing. The trees looked empty. Now, every time I think about that night, I feel a deep chill run down my spine. Whatever was out there, it wasn't just passing by. It had come right up to our tent, close enough to touch us, and it left without a trace. But the worst part? I can't stop wondering why it left, or if it'll come back the next time someone camps there. Camping with a friend had been something I had been excited about for weeks. We planned to hike to a remote spot, set up our tent by a quiet lake, and spend a weekend away from everything. The drive to the trailhead was calm, with only the sound of trees rustling and gravel crunching under the tires. We parked, grabbed our gear, and began the hike. The trail was hard to see, covered with thick brush and trees, the kind of place you'd only find if you knew exactly where it was. We made our way through the woods, using an old map I had found online. As we went deeper into the forest, the trees became denser, blocking out most of the sunlight. It was cooler there, and the air smelled of damp earth and pine. After a couple of hours, we reached the lake. It was small and almost hidden by the trees, with a surface as still as a mirror. We chose a spot on the far side, away from any possible visitors. It was perfect. We set up the tent, collected some firewood, and got ready for the night. The first night was normal, with just the usual forest sounds around us. By the second day, we had explored the area and even found an old abandoned cabin a short walk from our camp. It looked like it hadn't been used in years, with the roof falling in and the door barely hanging on. We peeked inside but found nothing but dust and rotting wood. It was clear no one had been there for a long time. As night fell on the second day, the forest seemed to get quieter. We sat by the fire, enjoying the warmth and the sense of being alone. It was the kind of quiet that makes you notice every small sound, branches snapping, leaves rustling, and distant animal calls. But then we started hearing something different. At first it was faint, almost like wind, but it wasn't. It was a low, steady hum coming from deep in the woods. We both heard it, but neither of us said anything. It was probably just a natural sound we weren't used to, but the hum grew louder, and with it came a feeling I couldn't shake. It felt like we were being watched, like something was out there, just beyond the firelight. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling only got stronger as the night went on. The hum became more noticeable, almost like a low, mechanical buzz, and it was getting closer. My heart started to race. I could tell my friend was also on edge, but we both tried to stay calm. We knew we were far from civilization, with no cell service and no easy way out. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the sound stopped. The forest was completely silent, as if it was holding its breath. That's when we saw it. Movement in the trees, just outside the fire's glow. It was fast, darting between the trees, too quick to see clearly. My stomach twisted with fear. I wanted to say something, to suggest we pack up and leave, but I couldn't find the words. The fire began to die down, casting long, flickering shadows. I grabbed more wood, but my hands were trembling as I threw the logs on the fire. I noticed the movement had stopped. The forest was still again, but the sense of unease remained, like the tension before a storm. We hardly slept that night, and when morning finally came, we were both on edge. We decided to cut our trip short. We packed up quickly, not talking about what had happened. The hike back to the car was nerve-wracking. Every sound made me jump, and every shadow seemed like it was hiding something, waiting to pounce. When we finally reached the car, a wave of relief washed over me. We threw our gear in the back and left as fast as we could. As we drove away, I glanced back at the forest. Now just a dark line on the horizon. The hum was gone, the movement was gone, but the feeling of being watched stayed with me. Now, even after all this time, I can't explain what happened that night. There were no ghosts or monsters, just a sound and a feeling that something was out there, something that didn't want us there. The most unsettling part? I'm not sure if it was watching us or if it knew we were leaving. Either way, I haven't been back to those woods since. Some places hold secrets we're better off never uncovering, and I know now that some experiences leave marks that never fully fade. I never expected a camping trip with my mother-in-law to become so unsettling. It was meant to be a relaxing weekend escape. Just the three of us, my wife, her mother, and me. We chose a spot deep in the woods, far away from the city's noise, hoping for some peace and quiet. We set up our tents and started a fire. As night fell, the forest was filled with the sounds of crickets and rustling leaves, but something felt off from the beginning. I figured it was just me being out of my element. After dinner, we sat by the fire, and as darkness took over, The shadows from the trees seemed to stretch and twist in strange ways. I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling and went to bed early, hoping a good night's sleep would help. Around midnight, I woke up to a scratching sound against the tent. My heart started racing. I held my breath, trying to listen. The scratching stopped, replaced by a faint dragging noise. I lay there frozen, too scared to move. I must have waited hours before I finally managed to look outside. The forest was completely silent, and everything seemed normal. I went back to sleep, but the uneasy feeling stayed with me. The next morning, my mother-in-law looked more tired than usual. She had dark circles under her eyes and seemed jittery. I didn't say anything, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Later, we decided to go for a hike. We followed a narrow path that led us deeper into the forest. About an hour in, I saw fresh footprints in the dirt, but they weren't ours. They were small and seemed to be going in the direction we had just come from. My skin crawled with fear, but I kept quiet, not wanting to worry anyone. When we got back to the campsite, I found my wife and her mother huddled together, looking through their belongings. Some of their personal items were missing, things that weren't just misplaced, but had been taken. That night, the scratching sound came back, louder and more persistent. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a flashlight and went outside. The forest was completely dark, with only my flashlight cutting through the blackness. I looked around the campsite, my heart pounding hard. Then I saw it. Deep, strange scratches in the dirt that made a circle around our campsite. My stomach dropped as I realized they were too precise to be made by animals. I rushed back to the tent, trying to ignore the growing fear in my gut. I made up my mind. I packed up our things and told my wife we were leaving right away. Even though she was hesitant, I was adamant. We drove home in the middle of the night, feeling a sense of relief as we left the forest behind. When we finally got home, I couldn't stop thinking about what we had escaped. The scratches, the missing items, and the unsettling noises. It wasn't until weeks later that I learned the area we camped in had a history of strange occurrences and disappearances. What scares me the most is that someone or something might have been watching us the entire time, waiting for the right moment to strike. I still wonder what would have happened if we had stayed just one more night.